Hello YouTubers, we're going to take a look at some post-World War II action, mainly focusing on the rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union, or the USSR, and which was known as the Cold War, and then we'll look at some major terms that have to do with the Cold War. So first of all, we're going to look at the Cold War. We're going to look at the big ideological differences between the United States and the Soviet Union, and what kind of specific things they fought over, even though they weren't actual wars. And then we'll look at the division of Germany, the Berlin Wall. We'll look at the US's Marshall Plan in order to rebuild after the war in Europe, and the Eastern Bloc, which is the Soviet kind of rebuilding of Europe after the war. And then NATO versus the Warsaw Pact and what the big deal was there. And followed by a quick intro to the European Union, and then Nikita Khrushchev, who is Stalin's successor in the Soviet Union, which was pretty quick. So let's start with just the basics. What was the Cold War? So the Cold War is the rivalry that existed between the United States and her democratic allies and the Soviet Union and her communist allies. And so the big ideological differences between these two major world powers and how this started. The Soviet Union had been communist for quite some time. When Stalin took over from Lenin after Lenin died in the 1920s, Stalin progressed a very different kind of communism. That it was a very heavy-handed authoritarian communist regime that was leading the Soviet Union. And so why did the United States care? Well, first of all, the Soviet Union was very successful in industrialization and mounting a large military and massive amounts of weapons. And so it showed that this communist system was working as far as that was concerned, as far as creating an industrial country and making them rival the United States for industrial power. The big ideological differences was how they did it. So first of all, politically, the Communist Party was the only party. It was a single party system in which the communist leaders were allowed to kind of direct activity, political activity, in any way they wanted. They also were able to direct economic activity in any way they wanted, which gave them an edge in Stalin's 5-year plans and such, getting industry going really rapidly in the Soviet Union. The United States was dedicated to the ideas of democracy, which means allowing for multiple parties to vie for power and to make decisions and to allow people to have a voice in their government decision making. And they were also dedicated to capitalism, which meant that they wanted to see economic competition between private business instead of the Soviet Union's idea of completely controlling business, state-controlled business. So this was huge differences in mindsets for how things would work, and the Soviet Union was proving to be quite a rival. And so at the end of World War II, which we had been allies in the United States with the Soviet Union, it was a kind of a tense relationship. Plus, the United States had just developed nuclear bombs, and so our atomic capabilities threatened the Soviet Union. They quickly started developing their own nuclear capabilities in warfare, and then it was this arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, stockpiling and building nuclear weapons. There was also a technological race, and the Soviet Union struck first by sending a satellite into space, and it shocked the United States because they had launched an unmanned satellite into space, and it was the first one ever. And so that started the space race. So not just competing for weapons, but also technology that could get us to space. And so the United States started spending massive amounts of money on getting our technology sector up and getting to space. And that's one of the reasons the main reason we landed on the moon. And there was no other real reason for the moon other than to kind of impress. It was one of these things, impress the rest of the world, and especially show the Soviet Union that the United States was tough. So those are kind of the big differences in the Cold War. Now, if we look at some of the other details, we look at the immediate battles that were taking place. The immediate battles that took place between the United States and the Soviet Union took place in Germany. So Germany was occupied directly after World War II. Hitler was dead. The German political system was crushed, and so Germany was at the will of the Allies once again. Now the Democratic Allies and the Communist Allies wanted to treat Germany very differently. They wanted to rebuild Germany in a different mindset. So Germany was split in half, and so there was an eastern side and a western side, and the Soviets controlled the east, and they made it communist East Germany, and the Allies controlled the west, and so was democratic West Germany. They split it up, and they also split the capital city of Berlin, which was inside of East Germany. So it became kind of a problem, because here's this capital city which is in East Germany, communist East Germany, but the city is split itself between an east and a west part of the capital city. So East Berlin and West Berlin represented this tiny microcosm in the Cold War, and if you happen to live on the eastern side, then you were forced to live one way in a communist system. If you happen to live on the western side, you were living in a totally different way. So the communists in the USSR attempted to kind of force the Allies out, the Democratic Allies out of Berlin, by blockading the roads into Berlin. And so the United States very famously engaged in the Berlin airlift, where they airlifted supplies into the West Berliners for almost a full year, and showed that they were not going to give up to the communists so easily. And pretty soon, international pressure kind of forced the Soviets to open up the roads again and allow them in. Now, then the Soviets would later, in the early 1960s, build the Berlin Wall. So the Berlin Wall, and I'll finish this video just talking about the Berlin Wall and what it meant about the Cold War. The Berlin Wall was kind of this very important symbol for what the Cold War was. It was dividing this city, a large city, into a democratic side and a communist side. And the Berlin Wall represented, for the West, the USSR's attempt to keep the people who were living under their hated system from escaping, and the USSR saw the Berlin Wall as a way from preventing the Westerners from coming into their city and letting other people in. So it was this divide which was kind of this very symbol of what the Cold War meant, this division between peoples. And so there's one whole half of the city living under communist rule and one living under democratic rule. Now we'll talk about the end of the Cold War, the breaking down of the Berlin Wall, and how that meant basically the end of the Cold War in a later video, but that's kind of the major symbol. So let me come back and talk about the rest of this vocab in another video, and I'll see you next time. Be awesome, YouTubers.